Welcome to Faith Fiction and Folklore, or the Try podcast, where we try not to F it up. And today we're going to talk about Wes Huff crushing rapid fire questions about Jesus. And the guy asking him the questions is Piers Morgan. He kind of plays the devil's advocate, as he says in the video. And today we got Gary and Cody. How you guys doing?
Oh, pretty good.
Pretty good.
Surviving, man. Surviving.
Anyways, we're just gonna basically react to this and fluff Wes Huff's feathers for a minute.
I probably won't.
You probably won't.
You're gonna go after Wes Huff? Okay.
I go after everybody.
All right, well, here we go. Let's see how this rolls.
Here we go.
Jesus Christ actually existed, actually walked this world, did predict his own death and resurrection. And then if you could have a camera running on the tomb in and around 33 AD, that an actual Jesus would have walked out on the third day after his crucifixion and burial.
Now, again, to play devil's advocate,
Wes Huff just went on Piers Morgan, and Pierce in this section of the video is playing devil's advocate, quite literally.
We're reacting to a reaction.
Allows for this
to a reaction of a reaction of a reaction.
Conversation, because basically Pierce asks all the questions that come up on this YouTube channel, in the comment section, etc., that people seem to think have never been asked before. Luckily, they have been, and luckily, Wes provides some good answers here. I'm really looking forward to sharing those answers with you all, and then I'll kind of step in periodically to round out some of the rough edges as well. So let's get into it.
what's interesting about your perspective on this, from your history and your studying, is that you believe a lot of the New Testament is unarguably factually true.
I do, yeah, and I think that that's demonstrable from the actual evidence that we can look at.
Is it indisputable to you that Jesus Christ existed, for example?
Oh, definitely so. I think we can say pretty unequivocally that a character, a first-century Jewish itinerant rabbi by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, did walk the dusty streets of first-century Roman-occupied Judea. I think that even the most skeptical scholars will grant that if we know very little about Jesus, we know that he did exist and that he was crucified in and around the beginning of the first century under the overseeing of the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate.
I mean, even a super, super basic Google search of what percentage of scholars believe Jesus existed will show you virtually all scholars, including historians, Bible scholars, and those studying ancient history, agree that Jesus existed as a historical figure. The Christ myth.
Trevor, do we have, like, the actual interview? Like, we should be able to pull it up pretty easy.
I did not look it up, no.
I'll look it up. You guys react. You two talk about it. Do you think Christ existed? Obviously, I do. I'm the traditionalist.
Yeah, I think Christ existed. 100%. I mean, it's not.
I find that documentary with that. Oh, I forgot his name again, Gary.
What's up?
Oh, Ron Wyatt?
Ron Wyatt. I think that documentary is quite compelling to the, existence of Jesus.
Yeah, that was a good one.
For sure.
Yeah.
Especially that thing with the microscope, man, and the light in the blood.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Intense.
Yeah, man. I am furious that not more people watched that episode, because that's like one of the coolest things we've talked about, and very few people watched it. So I never do this, but look for the Ron Wyatt episode on our channel. You need to watch it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Maybe we can go over it again just to see if it sticks again.
Yeah, maybe try it again.
React to our video on it.
React to our reaction of our
react to our own reaction.
All right. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead here. Jordan Peterson's on there. I don't know why he's there.
Oh, you got to clean your room.
And make 5-year plans.
5 years.
Fold your laundry.
I love Freedom Tunes. So good. Anyway.
I didn't sleep for 72 hours or whatever. What do you say?
7 days?
I don't remember.
Is it 7 days?
I don't remember.
It was a long time.
40 days and 40 nights.
I didn't sleep for 7 days. And how is that possible? Well, I'll tell you how it's possible, Joe. You go down, you lay down, and you stare at the ceiling for 8 hours, and then you get up.
I do that.
Yeah.
All right. Okie dokie. That was good. I
Thank
wasn't
you.
paying attention, but that was good. Okay.
What was?
You guys' impressions.
I have
One
my
line. It was all
my
terrible, but I thought
Jordan
maybe
Peterson impression is the worst.
it's okay. We all
The
suck.
worst.
We pretend like we're good at impressions. We're not.
You're okay at Jordan Peterson. I can't do it at all.
Oh,
we're all impressionable in some way.
It's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm thoroughly okay. Here we go. The actual...
But is it indisputable to you that Jesus Christ existed, for example?
Oh, definitely so. I think we can say pretty unequivocally that a character, a first century Jewish itinerant rabbi by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, did walk the dusty streets of first century Roman occupied Judea. I think that even the most skeptical scholars will grant that if we know very little about Jesus, we know that he did exist and that he was crucified in and around the beginning of the first century under the overseeing of the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate.
I want to play you a clip from one of my friends, Jordan Peterson, who's very skeptical about all this. And he said this.
Profound religious account is bottomless. Mm-hmm. And the biblical representations are like that. There's no limit to the amount of investigation they can bear, not least because the text itself is deeply cross-referenced. So there's an innumerable number of paths through it. It's like a chessboard. And so it's inexhaustible in its interpretive space.
That's true.
He's not saying anything.
What do you say to that, Wesley?
This is what I heard. You could interpret the Bible in a lot of different ways. Now,
yeah,
like playing chess.
It's weird because it's like, well, I mean, it is cross-referenced in that, you know, it's an anthology and you have to look up certain, you know, historical clues, like in terms of terminology and stuff to understand what's being like. For example, in the Gospels, you have to look up like stuff about the Jewish prophecy in Jeremiah 31 to kind of understand the kingdom of heaven and understand what, you know, the term Messiah meant and the suffering servant. Like you have to look up different things to understand what's going on in the New Testament. So in that sense, it is like a bibliography where you have to cross-reference it. I don't know why you would say that means its interpretive value is infinite, like a chessboard, though. I'm like, I agreed with the first part, but I'm like, I don't know if I agree with the second part.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess I agree.
I don't know. I guess I don't.
Based on your worldview, you know, like.
Yes, but presumably only one interpretation is right. So I don't know why.
Right.
It's like saying it's infinite in its interpretive space. Well, it's like, well, yeah, because people get crap wrong. I mean, I can interpret Huck Finn a million different ways and get it wrong every time. In that sense, its interpretive space is infinite. I don't know what you're actually pointing out, though. Like, if I wanted to say, you know, Huck Finn is an allegory for the future communist dictatorship of Canada, I mean, I could say that. It doesn't mean I'm right. So I don't know what he means.
Okay.
All right, maybe I'm not making sense.
I concede.
You concede? Were we arguing? I wasn't aware that we were arguing. But
I don't know.
I concur.
I concur. Doctor, do you concur? Yes. Okay.
No, son, I concede.
Yeah, it's interesting, Pierce. I really appreciate
I
Jordan
concurred
Peterson and
with
kind
your
of
concede.
the angle that he reveals on the biblical text and some of the kind of allegorical perspectives that it reveals. I don't deny that in the least. In fact, I think I've found Peterson very helpful in his Jungian approach in drawing some of those things out, whereas maybe prior to finding Jordan Peterson, I might have dismissed them in a way.
Okay, so he's going off Carl Jung's archetypes. Okay, I think I'm tracking.
Who's Carl Jung?
Oh
he
my
was
God.
a psychologist back in the
Trevor.
Yeah, he's after Freud, and he basically talked about symbolism and dreams and things of that sort. It's a
I like
very,
dreams.
very simplistic. I got through like half of a book of his, and that was it. So
Yeah, the
Too many
archetype stuff is
details.
cool.
huh? What'd you say, Cody?
The archetype stuff is cool.
Yeah, no, it's very handy for storytelling and stuff. So
And his shadow work. I mean that it's helpful for somebody that's struggling.
yeah, okay. Yeah, I know Peterson's a fan of him. He talks about him all the time in his lectures. So
Yeah.
That I think was probably too soon to do so. However, I think two things can be true at the exact same time, Pierce. I think we can grant that there is meaning that goes beyond the text, but not deny that there were actual events that took place that the people like Jordan Peterson talked.
Sorry, say that again.
I said, see, he said it could mean two things.
Yeah, okay.
As long as it's not the purple.
It's the purple, man. Yeah.
We had it. I'll tell you about it after the show, but we had another delightful commenter.
Oh, nice.
Talk about from the biblical narratives, individuals at the core, like Jesus Christ, actually existed, actually walked this world, did predict his own death and resurrection. And then if you could have a camera running on the tomb in and around 33 AD, that an actual Jesus would have walked out on the third day after his crucifixion and burial.
See, that is the crux of this.
He would have walked out with the camera.
Whether Jesus of Nazareth was resurrected really goes to the absolute essence and heart of Christianity, because obviously if he was, then that is a miracle, and then everyone that believes in Christianity and what it all stands for and Jesus and everything would feel validated by the fact, well, how else do you explain it? So it's at the crux of it. From the text of the New Testament, then, where is the actual hard evidence for you as an historian that actually happened?
Yeah, I think we do, Pierce, have a historical question in terms of we have an actual character who we can demonstrate that lived, and then we have that same character being demonstrated in multiple independent and cross-reference sources, chief of which we call the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But just because those are religious texts now doesn't necessarily negate that they are historical texts. These were independent written sources that come from the time frame. If we want to know about someone from the ancient world or history in general, we go to the earliest sources, preferably eyewitness sources. And I think that's what we have within the Gospels. So we have a character who lived, who died, and then a character who is said by an early Jesus community to have been resurrected. And the accounts of that are not just kind of scant. They're not seeing Jesus off from afar as some sort of apparition or something like that. What we have is the case of instances of the early Jesus community saying they walked with him, they talked with him, they ate with him. And this happened over the course of, as Luke in his combination, the Gospel of Luke and Acts, says over the course of 40 days. This wasn't a short event. And so there were as many as, Paul says, up to 500 witnesses who took part in this event before his ultimate, resurrecting, going to the ascension of the right hand of the Father. And so it's...
All right, thoughts. Is that enough evidence for you guys? Do you find that compelling?
Yes.
Cody?
His proof is the Gospels?
Yes.
I mean...
And the epistles of Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to have more than just that.
We have Joe Cephas.
That's why I find that Ron Wyatt documentary so compelling.
Yeah. We have Joe Cephas as well. There's other references to Christ existing at the time. So but it is an interesting argument though, because people don't think about the fact that yes, the Gospels are religious, but they are also legitimate historical documents from the time. We can prove that they weren't written in 400 AD. The names are consistent with the time frame, and the fact that they had qualifiers was a practice at the time. Wes Huff brought that up in a previous video we looked at, talking about how the names from the region match and all the little details match about the Gospels, so we can infer that it's an actual historical document. I think that's fair. So, all right, we'll move on. Let's see. Is there another... Trevor, is there a particular question that you were wanting us to address?
No, that was it.
That was the main one?
That was the main thing.
Okay, well, we can't go through the whole hour, so
No.
we've got about 13 minutes left before I know we've at least covered 30. So let's see. I'm going to scroll through here, and I'm actually going to try to pick out arguments. So, okay, Pierce is going to try to rebut the eyewitness arguments. So let's see what his counter is, and let's see how Wes Huff counters, and then we'll give our own reactions to it. All right, so there we go. Come on.
Now, again, to play devil's advocate, the argument against it goes, look, all these witnesses were likely to have been pretty primitive, mostly illiterate people. Eyewitness testimony notoriously is unreliable. It's the least credible evidence in a courtroom these days, for example. And since the historical method doesn't deal with miracles, it's ridiculous, people say, to base any history on it. And even Matthew's gospel tells us when Jesus appeared in front of his 11 disciples, some of them doubted, to which people say, well, if even not all his disciples believe this, why on earth should we?
Yeah, I think there are a few things going on there in terms of the historical method and how.
Yeah.
Do you guys have doubts every once in a while?
Oh, yeah.
About what?
Just anything in general.
Yes.
Because I know I do. It's difficult not to doubt.
I think I went through my doubting phase, or at least the worst of it, back in the teens when the new atheists were popular. You know, I watched their arguments pretty carefully and went through my existential crisis, as it were, back then. And I've listened to these apologetic type arguments for years. I mean, it's... First of all, it's just, in my opinion, to respond to what he said so far, like this idea that just because people didn't have electricity, you know, they were stupid. Like, I just reject that outright. It's like, oh, well, how smart could they possibly be? They couldn't even turn on a light bulb. It's like, well, yeah, well, you can't make a light bulb. Like, a monkey can turn on a light bulb. Try making one. That doesn't mean that everybody around you was stupid. Like, we stand on the shoulders of giants. That doesn't mean we're like infinitely smarter than the people that came before us. So the idea that just because people back then were quote unquote primitive, they were stupid, I just reject out of hand.
Yeah, me too.
I think that's pretty arrogant. And that's the first problem. Second problem is there's certain details that the Gospels give that are very counterintuitive to the culture at the time, which indicates that it was true. So, for example, the first people to have seen Christ risen were women. Now, if you're wanting to make a fake claim in that world, you would not have women being the first ones to see the resurrected Christ, because women were considered flighty and stupid back then. So, you know, in their minds, that would not have been compelling evidence. But if it's actually what happened, that's what they wrote. You know, that's what they would have wrote. So the fact that the witnesses were women is compelling. You know, things of that sort.
Like when Mary thought Jesus was the gardener or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, anybody have any thoughts to add?
I mean, I think there's a lot of gardeners named Jesus, so I wouldn't.
Racist. So, that's not as funny as it was the first time, but that's okay. So, all right. Trevor, you got anything to add?
I shared a video with you about racism.
Some other time, perhaps.
It's a
maybe later.
It's a joke. It's just one of a comedian telling a joke.
Okay, maybe we'll end the show on that. Okay. Sounds good.
Jesse Lee Peterson says racism doesn't exist.
It doesn't.
I agree.
We're going to move on.
How we actually evaluate things.
Somebody's a little sensitive.
Yeah, I blame the
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube. That's so sensitive. I blame the dieting. So anyway.
Only have witness testimony. You know, you do have something that's very different than a courtroom in a modern legal setting, right? Even something like hearsay. Well, all of ancient history in one sense is hearsay, but that doesn't apply when we apply it to the historiographical method. We need to use the same standards that when we would look at something like say the biographies of Tiberius with Velleius Paterculus, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassiodeo, when we have multiple instances of reporting on someone's life, we look at both the things that they agree on and the things maybe where they have a differentiation in detail, and then we try to the best of our ability explain some of the different instances that are going on. Now, I would say, to the accusation, well, these are just ancient, illiterate people. That's what C.S. Lewis referred to as chronological snobbery. Just because people are ancient neither means they're stupid nor that.
I like the way he put that better. That's pretty funny.
I love C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
They don't know what's going on. And what we have in terms of this event is really early on after Jesus's death, we have an explanation of what if the resurrection didn't take place, what we would expect. The 11 disciples are hiding in the upper room. They're scared. They're aware of other messianic movements in the ancient world. Individuals like Simon Bar Giora, who claimed to be the Messiah when his movement was squashed. So when he died, when he died, his movement was squashed. And so I think we have to look at, okay, what explains these 11 scared disciples then going on to not just proclaim that Jesus did rise from the dead, but actually went to the point of risking their lives in persecution. And some of them did die for that proclamation. And so I think it's not outside of the realm of possibility for history to actually be able to evaluate this evidence and say, okay, we have these questions. How then do we explain something like an empty tomb, or even Jesus's disciples go back and the account of the Pentecost happens in Jerusalem. So Jesus's disciples go back to the scene of the crime in the town where people would have saw him crucified, and now they're proclaiming he's resurrected. Well, why would you go back to the place where people could have actually known what actually happened, especially if you're trying to be disingenuous or dishonest? And then that's where it happens. And Stephen is the first martyr. That also happens in Jerusalem. That would have been a warning shot across the bow for the disciples if they wanted to continue on proclaiming these things. They would have realized that this is controversial, both in Jewish circles and in Gentile circles, to be proclaiming these things, to be declaring Jesus as Lord. One of the earliest confessions of Christianity was Jesus is Lord, when the society was saying Caesar is Lord. And so there were risks politically, there were risks religiously, and yet the disciples go on to proclaim these things, even to the detriment of their own lives.
What do you say when people say, well, look.
All right, so that's the third counter argument that I usually hear. It's the intellectual or the chronological snobbery is the first one. The second one that I've heard is the women in the tomb, and then the third one is the fact that the movement persisted even though there was political risks. What do you guys think about the third one? Do you find the third one compelling?
I do.
Okay. Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, why would you?
Yeah,
why would you go up against the political society when you know you're going to get mistreated or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. All right.
There are parts of the New Testament that allude to Jesus as Nazareth being the Son of God, and then there are parts where he appears to be God himself. How do you counter that argument that there's an inconsistency there?
Yeah, so Son of God is a title that is reserved for not differentiating Jesus from God. In John's gospel in particular, we have instance where Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of God in a way that actually has the Jews picking up stones to stone him. And when he says, what are these good works are you going to stone me for? They say, not for your good works, but because you call Jesus your Father, making yourself equal with God. And, Jesus then, he doesn't say, oh, no, you've misunderstood me. My Muslim friends like to point out that there are multiple sons of God throughout the Bible. David was referred to as a son of God. But what's unique is that despite there being, sometimes my Muslim friends like to say, sons by the tons, despite that reality, that Jesus is not claiming to be a son of God, he's claiming to be the Son of God in a unique way that not only puts him on equal footing with the Father, but in this monotheistic context of ancient Judaism, actually ascribes to himself honors, attributes, names, and deeds that only God himself has the right to hold. And so the Jews throughout the New Testament, throughout Jesus's ministry and his goings on, they aren't confused by the things he says. You know, when he, at the beginning of Mark's gospel, when he forgives the sins of a person, their response is, who can forgive sins but God alone? And they're exactly right. Only God can forgive our sins. And so Jesus is, in his kind of answer, saying, you know, I'm doing this so that you know that the Son of Man can forgive sins. That's not a correction. That's a reframing in saying, yes, you're right. Only God can forgive sins. That's what I'm doing. Who does that make me?
I've seen Ricky Gervais on various...
All right, so, Cody, we've had back and forth on this multiple times. I don't know if we need to revisit it because we've, like, argued so many times about the Trinity. There is an interesting video on Standing for Truth. There's a debate about the Trinity I'm currently watching. I might have to send you the link later.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I think that's pretty good. I am going to pick one more question, and then we'll react to it, and then we're going to call this one good.
Okay.
Sound good? All right.
Yep.
Okay.
What's your one more question?
I got to find it. Let's see. The Advan Man, Mythology Drift, Discovery of Garden Beneath, when were the Gospels written? Wesley explains the rise of Islam, Hasmaga, Wesley on the Quran's historical inaccuracies. Let's see. Let's do Mythology Drift.
How excited you get, Wesley, when there's a new revelation which seems to support historical evidence of stuff in the Bible? And I'll give an example. There's been a new discovery at the site of Jesus' resurrection that appears to corroborate what is in the New Testament, an archaeological discovery, which is...
Oh, wait, I'm too far back. Hang on, sorry. My bad.
You could argue that Jesus Christ was the first and greatest celebrity that the world had ever seen. I know lots of really big celebrities, and I know a lot of stuff about them, and then I read stuff about them which I know to be untrue. In other words, a mythology builds up around incredibly famous people over time that often bears no relation to reality, and often they don't really care if they're still alive because it all adds to the general mythology and celebrity status, and, you know, why kill a good story if you can possibly avoid it, and so on. When you read the New Testament with an historian's eye, do you see evidence of mythology creeping in where the basic tenets of Jesus of Nazareth and what happened to him and so on may well all be, you know, to your eyes, verifiable historically, but that actually there may be mythology built up around that kind of character, and it's almost impossible to test that?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to this argument in that I think we do see mythological drift for particular people, especially as there is a time gap between, you know, some of the instances that we have in terms of written documentation of these individuals. I think what I would look at as a historian is when we're looking at the particulars of Jesus's life, there are things that I just don't think you would make up. I mean, even the fact that Jesus comes from the city Nazareth, it's really the boonies, for lack of a better way of putting it, of Israel. People didn't expect Jesus to come from Nazareth. They didn't expect the Messiah to be a traveling itinerant rabbi. They expected in Jesus's day, with the cultural expectation of who the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one who was predicted by particularly individuals like the prophets in the Old Testament, they expected him to be a conqueror. They expected him to come and to release the nation of Israel from under the oppression of the Romans. They did not expect the Messiah to be murdered by the Romans. And so I think if you're making up stories about him, there are particular details that we find in the New Testament and in the biographies of Jesus's life that really the only true explanation for them, I would contend, is because they actually happened. Even if you read the accounts of the...
So that is an interesting point. When you study Rome, like Ryan Reeves, I think it's Ryan Reeves, he has some good stuff on this. One of the reasons the Romans found Christians repugnant is because they couldn't imagine, like, God dying, you know, and they thought that was like this ultimate sign of weakness. And they would mock Christianity for that. So, for example, one of the earliest forms of graffiti found in Rome is a depiction of somebody bowing and worshiping a crucified man with a donkey on his head. And that was supposed to be like the interpretation of Christians. And so the idea that this is some kind of mythology doesn't really work, because the religion itself is structured in such a way that it's not flattering. It wasn't flattering for the Jewish people because they thought Christ was supposed to be a conqueror. It wasn't flattering towards the Romans because the Romans, thought, what kind of God would die, and they didn't value weakness at all. And so there's nobody who would have found this to be a favorable religion, except for like women, because there was like prohibitions on sleeping around, and so the women are like, yay, my husband actually gets to come home. So it wasn't exactly, they did that mythology, if you wanted to even use that term, which I wouldn't like. It's not flattering by their standards. So yeah, I don't think that idea really works. And I don't think it would have worked for a long time. Like, I don't know when those values really shifted, but it would have been hundreds of years after the fact before it started shifting. Also, we have accounts of like Jesus becoming a mythological figure. That's like the Gnostic Gospels. Like in Egypt, Christ is referred to as a magician, in like a cup they found recently, I believe. So like, you can see a mythology about him growing that's apart from Christianity anyhow. So, and that mythology is more in line with, you might say, the values of their day. There's a lot more spectacle to them. So, anyway. Anybody have any thoughts?
That's interesting.
Not a single one.
Not a single one. All right. Well, I think we're going to call that good and move on to the last episode for the evening.
Thank you.
Yep. So, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you're part of the live stream, we've got one segment left. If you're watching us after the fact, we appreciate your time, and we'll see you later. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Faith, Fiction, and Folklore. If you did, we would love it if you would subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Rumble. We can also be found on X, Instagram, and Facebook. And we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Thank you again very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.